God morgon och varmt välkomna till oss på IRM. Vi sänder live idag och vi vill säga ett varmt välkomna till alla tittare från Danmark. Och vi har också faktiskt en del tittare från övriga Skandinavien. Varmt välkomna även till er. Jag heter Madeleine Thor och med mig här idag har jag min kollega Tobias Hedström.
Hej!
Och vi ska tillsammans ta er igenom utvecklingen och prognosen för den danska reklammarknaden. And as you know, we're going to have this presentation in English, so let's just switch languages. Now, if you have any questions during the presentation, there is a chat, so please don't hesitate to ask those questions. We are going to have a segment at the end where we're going to raise any questions that you might have. So don't hesitate, ask your questions in the chat. Let's dive into it. Today, we will be presenting the forecast for the Danish ad market in 2022. And as you will see, we've had two quite dramatic years behind us. We've had a 2020 where we've been in a valley of despair, and following that we've had a 2021 which is actually turning out to be a record-breaking year, especially for the digital ad market. So we have, I think, a really interesting presentation for you here today. And I know that many of you watching today know a lot about IRM and that you've subscribed for a long time. But if you are new to us, let me just give you a few words about who we are. So we are a small organization, 4 employees, and we are non-profit. We are also an industry body. And our purpose is but one, to measure the net advertising spend. So with us, you will get the net advertising spend in Denmark biannually, and you will also get a yearly forecast. And we're here today to present that forecast. It's also important to know that we are non-political and that we seek cooperation with all different media in order to be able to perform the best possible measurements in not only Denmark, but actually in Sweden and in Norway too. So this is a Scandinavian venture. Okay, so that's our goal, to provide everyone on the market with a world-class ad spend measurement. And now let's look at the agenda. So I'm going to start out with the 2 first agenda points here. So I'm going to be talking about the long-term development for the advertising spend. And after that, we're going to be looking at some of the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. And following that, my colleague Tobias is going to take you through the forecast. Okay. So let's dive into the first agenda point and look at the media ad sales revenues and long-term trends. And please bear with me, we're going to have a lot of graphs, we're going to have a lot of figures, but hopefully you're going to feel quite enlightened when this is all ready. So let's look at the facts so far, and let's look at the development of the market from 2007 up until last year, so that's 2020. So what happened during these years? Well, what you can say is that back in 2007, as you can see in the graph here, I'm going to show you, we had a market worth 14.7 billion Danish crowns. And after that, we saw the financial crisis, and that was a deep crisis for advertising investments. As you can see here in the blue staple, I'm going to circle it for you, investment fell by 15%. So quite dramatic times. And after that, there was a recovery, but not a full recovery. We can see here, I'm going to show you on the graph, 2010 and 2011, a recovery, but rather small gains to the market. After that, we've had quite a bear market during several years, not much happening, small increases. And then in March 2020 comes COVID-19, comes the pandemic. And of course, based on the drop that we saw in 2009 of 15% and expectations of large drops. But those large drops actually mostly extended to the first half, actually to the second quarter. And after that, we saw improvements, and mainly for the digital investments. So we landed at 2020 with a mere minus 4.4 and a market at 13.5 billion DKKs. So that is an overview of what the ad market looked like running into this year. Another major trend that I would like to share with you is on the next page. Here we can see the shift that we've seen during the past 10 years from print media to digital. And really it becomes so very clear when you see, and I'm going to show you now on the graph, that digital at the beginning of this period in 2010 had a market share of 30%, and now last year in 2020, 2 out of 3 Danish advertising crowns went to digital alternatives. So really it's been 10 very dramatic years. And what we can add to that now was COVID-19 and what happened during 2020 and 2021 concerning COVID-19. I am going to show you now a graph where you are going to be seeing in blue the development, the growth year on year for advertising investments, and in red you are going to see the real GDP development. Now, what is the first thing that strikes you about this graph? Well, to me, one of the things that strikes me is the volatility of the blue line, and this means that advertising investments obviously are very volatile when it comes to, for example, a crisis. So during the financial crisis, which we see here, I'm going to circle it for you now so you can see on the graph, the advertising investments took a deep dive. We obviously also saw GDP reductions, but not quite as large as the advertising investments. And so what is quite interesting to see here is the development in 2020 and also the development in the first half of 2021, which we at IRM presented in October. And what we could see there was really GDP starting to recover. And for the advertising investments, we really saw a record-breaking growth that we did not expect. And let me tell you a little bit more about that. And let me give you our overall forecast for the market, which we can see on this slide, which just appeared. Now, what we see here is really a very, very swift recovery. Now, you might be watching this and asking, how have we at IRM performed this forecast? And that's a very important question. Well, one thing for the first is, as a forecaster, the trend is your friend, you might say. So obviously very, very important to look at our historical patterns and in which structural position a media is. A second thing that we look at, and which is obviously very correlated with the ad market, is the GDP development. So we look at the development of the economy. And the final way that we forecast the market is by interviews. Many of you watching today are sitting very close to the market, working with television advertising or newspaper advertising or digital advertising. And we do a set of interviews with both buyers and sellers in order to get the on-the-ground perspective. So those three components form the basis for this forecast, which I'm presenting today. And here is the overall forecast. And as you can see, we are forecasting for 2021, so this year. We have presented the first half, and we have forecasted the second half. We have forecasted in total a 12% growth for 2021. So a very high growth. And should we be correct, then the advertising investment will surpass 15 billion DKK, and for the first time actually surpass the 2007 figure of 14.7 billion DKK. And for next year, we're actually also forecasting a very good growth, an excellent growth. It looks small compared to the 12% that we've registered this year, but then for this year, also remember the comparison figure for last year is a minus 4.4. So we see a very good growth this year and a continued growth in 2022 and a 15.8 billion DKK market, which obviously would be a new all-time high. So from IRM today, we are presenting a very positive forecast. And I would like to put this somewhat into perspective in the last slide before I introduce my colleague Tobias. And this is quite an interesting slide. We see an index. We first see in the graph the financial crisis, this graph here, I'm going to show you. Here we see the financial crisis in 2009. We can see the deep dive that the ad market took when it lost a large part of its investments, around 15%. We can then see the recovery during 2010 and 2011, and we can see that after 2 years, we were quite far from reaching 2008 levels. So, and we've looked at a lot of data, we've looked at a lot of stats throughout Europe, and on average, the recovery after a crisis will take 3 years. So, what's happened in Denmark during this year is quite astonishing, because not only will the advertising market have recovered all of the loss from 2020, the advertising market will also surpass the 2019 numbers. So that is quite a unique happening and an excellent performance from the Danish advertising investments. No longer at all do we see a bear market, but definitely a very, very strong bull market right now. And with that, we're going to go into more detail with the forecast, and I will be introducing my colleague Tobias. He and I are together working a lot with the Danish market. Welcome, Tobias. I'm going to leave the word with you.
Thank you. So I will be looking what this means for each individual media. And I'm going to start by going back and have a look at the 2009 credit crunch. We started off with a drop of 15% in 2009. And this is by far the largest drop we've seen in our data when it comes to the ad market. We see that printed media took quite a big hit. Broadcasted a little less, but still did a drop. But internet actually gained a bit during this term. And this, of course, is due to the structural changes in our media consumption. So if we compare that to today, we see here the development for media categories from 2018 up till 2022. In 2018, we already see a bit of the structural long-term trends. Then 2020, we see the pandemic hitting Denmark, lockdowns, and the rest of the world. A huge drop in the printed media. Broadcasted also takes quite a big drop, whereas internet actually continues to gain. Not as much, but still gaining. Come this year, we see a very strong recovery for the ad market. The printed media is leveling out. We see that radio is recovering. TV is above the 2019 levels, and internet has actually gained 25% compared to 2018. This, of course, is reflected in the market share. Of these 15 billion kronor we will see coming into the ad market today, this year, 68% will go to online media. The bulk of this will be on search. They will get every third krona coming in. And a close second with 25% is display advertising. This display advertising includes such as social media and online video. Search will have a turnover of 4.2 billion, whereas display ad will have 3.7 billion this year. Going into details with internet, you will have a strong growth with almost 14% this year, and that means that internet advertising will be in excess of 10 billion kronor. Next year we'll see a lower figure, 7%, but that's still a lot of new money coming into internet advertising. These are different categories of internet advertising, and what we see is that search is doing pretty well with 16% gain, but display advertising is growing with 18% this year. Further deep down into the different categories of display advertising, we see that banners shows a growth of almost 8%. Social media, 24% this year and 12% next year. But the strongest growth we see in online video, that will grow by 25% this year and 17% next year. Printed media. Looking at the newspaper, we see they took quite a big hit during the pandemic year 2020. And with this fairly good economy we got, and these really weak comparison figures, we thought we're going to get a really good recovery this year, which haven't happened. The rebound isn't there, and the figure is going to continue to drop during this year and next year. Important to remember though is that even though these figures are negative, they're still above the long-term trend for printed media. Special interest media. Like other printed media, this one was affected badly by the pandemic. Magazines lost 30% of their ad revenues. And we will see some recovery during this year, but come 2022, they will be back on negative trajectory. Trade press are back on the long-term trend, which means a small loss year on year. TV managed to get back the whole loss from 2020, but we will see a small drop next year. And this is due to our changing behaviors and more streaming consumption, but also due to the uncertainty when it comes to changing a measuring system. Cinema, due to lockdown, took quite a hit in 2020. And even though they will recover during next year, we won't see them getting back to the pre-pandemic levels. And of course, with all these new variations, we're not sure if another lockdown is going to hit Denmark. Outdoor, another category that took quite a hit due to restriction and less people moving around. This year saw a bit of recovery, and this will continue on into the next year. And this means that the outdoor will be back on pre-COVID levels during next year. I'm not sure if you, like me, saw this in your LinkedIn last year. It's quite a good representation, this cartoon. Because one thing we've seen that is clear is that this pandemic had made a shift in our consumer behavior and made it accelerate. And even though we're going to come back to the long-term trend in media consumption once the pandemic's over, we're going to see this on a whole new, higher level. Of course, all of this data can be found in our database for those of you that subscribe to them. If you don't subscribe to them, give us a call and we will give you a good deal on them. And if you haven't signed up for a newsletter, do that and we will let you know when we got new data for you. That is all from us. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Tobias, for this presentation. If you would like to contact us, we have our contact details here. And actually, at this point, there are no questions in the chat, but luckily, I have some questions for you. So, I mean, this has been quite a dramatic 2 years that we've seen here. What actually surprised you about these 2 years?
Well, that we would take quite a big hit in a pandemic wasn't surprising. But what is surprising is the speed with which we saw the recovery. We pretty much only saw a tough first half of 2020, and then we started to gain traction and growing again. And that surprised me a lot.
And of course, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about in our reports are the reasons for this quick recovery. One of them being, people using more e-commerce, people using more media at home. So there's a lot of things in the customer behavior here that has supported this development.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And another question that we've looked at is, what can we learn? If you are a media, what can you learn from this crisis? I mean, till next time.
Well, that tough economy situation is going to impact the ad market isn't surprising. And we know that the ad market is much more volatile than the rest of the economy. And that's not surprising. But when it comes to external shocks, like this pandemic was, and to some extent the 2009 credit crunch, we will see an acceleration of our changing behavior. And that one is a good one to remember to next time.
And one thing that I can add to that is a crisis will come, and our ad investments, which we are all working with, are going to be volatile. That's just the way it is. Okay, one final question. What can we expect next from IRM? Do you have anything interesting for the audience that you can share?
Yes, already tomorrow we're going to present our data for the international ad market 2020. So tomorrow, 10th of December, we'll release that, and then you can see how Danish market does compared to the rest of the world.
Okay, super interesting. We're looking forward to check out how Denmark is doing compared to the rest of the world. And don't forget the Nordic reports, where we can also see every half year actually how Denmark is doing in relation to the rest of the Nordic region. And I know that many of you are working in Nordic or Scandi settings, so that this might be interesting. We at IRM, Tobias and myself, are working a lot with Denmark. Please contact either one of us if you have any more questions. We are available, and as you saw, the contact details are also available on the last slide that we presented. We would like to thank you so much for joining us today for this presentation of the Danish ad market forecast, and have a great day. Bye.
Bye.